Coming up, we prepare for the start of the 2022 NFL season. This is Locked On Game to Game NFL.
Every game, every team, every angle. Locked On Game to Game, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Game to Game NFL. I'm Kainani Stevens. Thank you for making Locked On your first listen every single weekday. We are going to take a look at all of our week one matchups in the NFL from the people that know them the best, our Locked On NFL hosts. We start out with the Chicago Bears. They hope they can improve on last year's 6-11 record, and they hope Justin Fields is going to be a big part of how they do that going forward. Chicago gets ready to face off against another quarterback hoping to prove himself. He's with the 49ers. Locked On Bears gives us the key to starting off the season on the right foot.
The Chicago Bears need to make things difficult for a raw and inexperienced Trey Lance in order to beat the San Francisco 49ers on Sunday. I'm Lauren Cox, host of the Locked On Bears podcast. And everyone's going to be watching Justin Fields, but I think for the Bears, it's about throwing some new things at Lance that maybe he hasn't seen before in his limited experience quarterbacking in his entire career. The Bears can slow down Lance, maybe get a turnover or two. That's what makes things easier on Justin Fields. It would allow the Bears to run the ball a little bit more and not allow these San Francisco 49ers pass rushers to play with a lead and really try and get after this Bears quarterback. I think the Bears want to control the game, control the clock, and keep things difficult on Lance in order to win what might be then a tougher, lower-scoring game that the Bears battle out. For more on the Chicago Bears and this weekend's big matchup, be sure to check out the Locked On Bears podcast Monday through Friday, free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
The NFC South is still Tom Brady's division to lose, and it's especially wide open this year after two of the other teams have lost their longtime starting quarterbacks. The Falcons and the Saints are both going to have new players under center this year, and our Locked On hosts go over those changes and what you need to know to start the season.
The Atlanta Falcons must stop the run in order to win and beat the New Orleans Saints in Week 1. I'm Aaron Freeman, host of Locked On Falcons podcast. Simply put, when the Falcons beat the Saints in Week 9 of last year, they gave up 109 rushing yards, but then gave up 195 rushing yards when they lost to the Saints in Week 18, and that's with neither matchup featuring Jameis Winston or Michael Thomas, nor newly added receivers like Chris Olave and Jarvis Landry. And slowing down that Saints passing attack will be challenge enough for the Falcons, and they can't afford to allow both dimensions of the Saints offense to attack them on Sunday. For more coverage of the Atlanta Falcons in this weekend's matchup against their hated division rival, be sure to check out Locked On Falcons podcast Monday through Friday, free and available wherever you get your podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
The New Orleans Saints must establish their identity early and remind the Atlanta Falcons exactly who they are often on Sunday in order to kick off the 2022 NFL season with a win. I'm Ross Jackson, host of the Locked On Saints podcast. The New Orleans Saints will walk into Mercedes-Benz Stadium with the new head coach, Dennis Allen, a new head coach for the first time since 2006 for this team. And that means that they're going to be looking to establish their identity early and often. And while there are a lot of new and enticing faces, new weapons for Jameis Winston, new leadership like Tyrann Mathieu on the defensive side, it's going to come down to the tried and true run game, defense first mentality of Dennis Allen, who's a defensive head coach, and the New Orleans Saints in order to start off their 2022 season with a win. It's going to come down to ball control and, of course, being able to pick up yardage on the ground and get Alvin Kamara going. For more on the New Orleans Saints opening matchup against the Atlanta Falcons and the New Orleans Saints as a whole, make sure you find the Locked On Saints podcast, free and available on all podcast apps and on YouTube as well. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
The Eagles surprised a lot of people last season by taking that last wild card spot in the NFC in 2021. While their Week 1 opponent is the Lions, they're just looking for any improvement over their 3 wins last year. Locked On Eagles and Lions tell you who can lead either team to a first-week victory in Detroit.
The key to a Philadelphia Eagles win this Sunday in their season opener against the Detroit Lions will be simply not to beat themselves. I'm Louis DiBiase, host of the Locked On Eagles podcast. When you look at the Eagles roster, On offense and on defense, they are a superior team to the Detroit Lions. They are going to have a lot of mismatches that they need to take advantage of. Simply do what this team can with the talent they have, and they're going to get a victory. Jalen Hurts in this passing attack need to utilize A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and Dallas Goedert. I'm not sure the Lions have the personnel to match up with that kind of big three, not to mention the offensive line in the run game that dominated Detroit last year in the regular season. And then on defense, the Eagles need to make sure they tackle. That was a rusty part of their game in the preseason. Get guys to the ground and don't give up easy yards for Jared Goff, who already is a limited playmaker at the quarterback position. I'm Louis DiBiase. For more on the Philadelphia Eagles, subscribe to Locked On Eagles Monday through Friday, wherever you get your podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
The Detroit Lions must stop the run in order to knock off the Philadelphia Eagles on Sunday. I'm Matt Derry, the host of the Locked On Lions podcast, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It is pretty simple, ladies and gentlemen. A year ago, the Philadelphia Eagles came into Ford Field. It was Halloween and ran the football up the gut of the Lions defense all day long en route to a 44-6 win. It was ugly. The Lions' interior defensive line that day just got bruised and battered by Boston Scott and company. Now, Scott, Miles Sanders, Jalen Hurts, and the Eagles, with a better football team, come back to town for week one, and that interior of the defensive line for the Lions kind of remains the same. Aleem McNeil, Michael Brockers. Lions have done a great job adding to the edge with Aiden Hutchinson, their first-round pick, and Austin Bryant's coming on. But I still have concerns about stopping the run, the RPO action with the Eagles and Jalen Hurts, and we'll see if the Lions can handle their business Sunday, stop that run, and have a better result than they did a year ago. For more on your Detroit Lions and this weekend's big matchup, be sure to check out the Locked On Lions podcast every Monday through Friday, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
The Panthers have new quarterbacks on their roster, and one of them is looking to get revenge against his old team in Week 1. Locked On Panthers reviews the keys to Baker Mayfield and Carolina beating Cleveland.
The Carolina Panthers must stop the run if they're going to beat the Cleveland Browns on Sunday. I'm Julian Council, host of the Locked On Panthers podcast. All the attention on Sunday at Bank of America Stadium in Uptown Charlotte is going to be on Baker Mayfield trying to get revenge against his former team, the Cleveland Browns. But that should not be the main storyline for the Carolina Panthers as far as they're concerned, as they must be able to stop the run and make backup quarterback Jacoby Brissett beat them on Sunday afternoon. A year ago, the Carolina Panthers ranked 18th in the league against the run. Some days they were great, other days they got gashed, and Cleveland is going to want to establish the run game with Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt on Sunday afternoon to aid their backup quarterback in Jacoby Brissett. So the Panthers are going to come up victorious and allow Baker Mayfield to get the revenge against his former team. That defensive front seven is going to have to step up and put a hat on Chubb and on the run game of Cleveland for the Carolina Panthers to win on Sunday afternoon. For more on your Carolina Panthers and this weekend's big matchup, be sure to check out the Locked On Panthers podcast every Monday through Friday. Free and available wherever you get your podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
The two best teams from the NFC North last season are the favorites to win it again this year. And the Packers and Vikings will face off to begin the season in Minnesota, giving one team an early edge against the other. Will Aaron Rodgers with a new top receiver or the Vikings with a new coach come out on top? Our Locked On local experts search for those answers.
The Green Bay Packers must protect Aaron Rodgers against the Minnesota Vikings on Sunday afternoon. I'm Peter Bukowski, host of Locked On Packers, and with offensive line questions in Green Bay. Will David Bakhtiari play in this one? Will Elton Jenkins play in this one? Each still recovering from ACL surgery. In the case of David Bakhtiari, we're talking about 18 months removed from that original ACL surgery against a Vikings pass rush that gets back Danielle Hunter and gets back Za'Darius Smith. The flip side of that is they're installing a new defense under new defensive coordinator Ed Donatel. Will they be able to scheme up the kind of pressures Mike Zimmer was last season when they were 29th in pass rush win rate, but 6th in pressure percentage because Mike Zimmer is Mike Zimmer? it seems like they're going to be able to rush 4 more often. If they can, that makes life much easier on that defense, defending a Packers offense that could be without Allen Lazard and is going to be relying heavily on rookies like Romeo Doubs and Christian Watson. Protect Aaron Rodgers. Give him time to throw and exploit that new defensive identity as the Vikings work to try and figure it all out.
It's simple. If the Vikings are going to beat the Green Bay Packers on Sunday at US Bank Stadium, they're going to have to cover. What's up, everybody? Luke Braun here from Locked On Vikings, and there is talent all over this Week 1 divisional matchup, the first one in the Kevin O'Connell era. And where it really comes down to when there's a lot of strength on strength is where the weaknesses are. And for the Vikings, the weakness is going to be the secondary on the outside. You have unproven players, younger guys getting reps, guys like Cam Dantzler backed up by rookies, and then also like Patrick Peterson. Can they keep up with guys like Allen Lazard and young stud like Romeo Doubs, who they're really excited about over there? Can you keep up with those guys? If they can man cover and if they can keep up and beat that wide receiver core, it's going to be that much harder for Aaron Rodgers to do what Aaron Rodgers does. But every little bit of space you see, he's going to find. So it's going to be really, really crucial to give up as little as possible. For more on all of this, check out Crossover Thursdays on the Locked On Podcast Network.
Coming up, we'll continue our look around the league for Week 1 of the NFL season. This is Locked On Game to Game NFL. This edition of Locked On Game to Game is brought to you by BetOnline, the #1 spot for all of your online sports gambling needs. Professional and college football are now underway, so if you want to get in on the action, you just have to head over to betonline.net. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. The Arizona Cardinals started out last season exactly the way they wanted to. It was just the 5 losses in 6 games that ended the season that needs some fixing. Our Locked On Cardinals host tells us how that happened and how Arizona picks things up in Week 1 against the Chiefs.
The Arizona Cardinals must get off to a hot start offensively and disrupt Patrick Mahomes. I'm Alex Clancy, host of Locked On Cardinals. The Kansas City Chiefs coming into town with a somewhat new-look offense without Tyreek Hill. It's going to be an offensive juggernaut afternoon at State Farm Stadium, where the Arizona Cardinals need to instill their dominance offensively immediately. The over-under is very high. A lot of points are expected to be scored, and the Arizona Cardinals offense, without DeAndre Hopkins and potentially without Zach Ertz, need to utilize Hollywood Brown and Kyler Murray fresh off his new contract extension to put up a lot of points to keep the Cardinals in this game. And then on the other side, they absolutely need to disrupt Patrick Mahomes. The Chiefs' offensive line is much improved, and without Chandler Jones there, the pass rush by committee, as defensive coordinator Van Joseph calls it, needs to be firing on all cylinders as well come Sunday afternoon. For more info on the Arizona Cardinals and this weekend's big matchup, be sure to check out Locked On Cardinals podcast every Monday through Friday, free and available wherever you get your podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Tom Brady starts his next attempt at ring number 8 against America's team and the Cowboys, who still have just 3 playoff wins through all of Tom Brady's career combined. Both teams want to win their division this year, and our Locked On experts tell you the key for making it happen for both of them.
Who will Tom Brady throw the ball to when the Tampa Bay Buccaneers visit the Dallas Cowboys in Week 1? I'm David Harrison of the Locked On Bucs podcast, and that's the burning question for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as they get set to head to Jerry's World to face the Dallas Cowboys in Week 1 for the second time in consecutive seasons. But this Buccaneers team is not the Buccaneers team the Dallas Cowboys saw 1 year ago. Shout out to Greg Auman of The Athletic, who pointed out on Twitter this week that the Buccaneers are going to be looking to replace almost half of the snaps on offense from the players that they had last year when the Cowboys visited Tampa. That game, of course, a close one with Chris Godwin still on the mend, Julio Jones potentially still getting up to speed, Russell Gage also on the mend from training camp injuries. Mike Evans is about the only receiver we know for sure should be on the field Sunday night against the Dallas Cowboys. Who Tom Brady has and how well he uses them is going to help determine in a big way whether or not it's Dak Prescott or Tom Brady celebrating a victory after Week 1. For more on this game and all things Buccaneers, check out James Yarko and I on the Locked On Bucs podcast, 5 days a week, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
If the Cowboys are going to win against the Buccaneers this Sunday night, it is imperative that they help their young left side of their offensive line. I'm Landon McCool with the Locked On Cowboys podcast, and the Cowboys going up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to start the season again this year. Hopefully with a little bit healthier Dak, hopefully with a little bit better defense, but one area where they are going to need to pay special attention to is their left tackle and left guard spot. They had Tyron Smith up until about a week and a half ago when unfortunately he tore his hamstring and will likely see the IR for the majority of the season. So the backup plan now is to kick young Tyler Smith, who is your tackle of the future, out to left tackle, maybe a little bit early, and then have Connor McGovern, who was the guard that he was competing with for the left guard spot, just go ahead and step up and take that spot. The Cowboys are going to have to find a way to stop the Vita Veas, the Shaq Barretts of the world, in order to slow down the Tampa Bay vaunted pass rush and give Dak the time that he needs to operate in order to win this game. For more information on us, make sure you check out the Locked On Cowboys podcast and all the other podcasts in the Locked On Podcast Network. We're free Monday through Friday wherever podcasts are available. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
The Washington Commanders have a new quarterback, and they hope Carson Wentz can be the start of an answer to all of Washington's recent problems at that position. A Week 1 game against the Jags will serve as a strong test of where Locked On Commanders and Washington stand to start this season.
Stop me if you've heard this before, but the turnover battle is going to determine whether or not the Washington Commanders come away with a win in Week 1. I'm David Harrison of the Locked On Commanders podcast, and I know the turnover battle always critical in determining who wins a football game, especially in the National Football League. But when you look at the Washington Commanders, that turnover battle has even bigger significance for this team entering the NFL season, not just because of Week 1, but for what it means moving into the season. If you look at quarterback Carson Wentz, the way he left the Indianapolis Colts at final regular season loss to this same Jacksonville Jaguars team in the final week of the 2021 regular season, an interception in that game and a lost fumble in that game. And then you look at starting running back Antonio Gibson, who is going to get the start as the RB1 for Washington with Brian Robinson Jr. on the mend. He has had a known fumbling issue. He fumbled during training camp, fumbled during the preseason, which contributed to his being unseated by the rookie before he suffered his injury. Can Antonio Gibson secure the ball for the Washington Commanders? If he and Wentz can do that, protect the football, they should come away with a win in Week 1 against the Jacksonville Jaguars. For more on this and everything Washington Commanders, check out Chris Russell and I on the Locked On Commanders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Another team hoping to take a step forward and kind of find their identity is the New York Giants. They are heading into the final year of Daniel Jones's rookie contract. No fifth-year option picked up by them. So can Jones prove he's the guy for New York in 2022? Our Locked On Giants host tells you the keys to starting out 1-0 against the Titans.
The New York Giants have to find a way to cut the legs out from underneath the Tennessee Titans running game as led by Derrick Henry. Hi, everybody. I'm Patricia Traina, host of the Locked On Giants podcast. And if Big Blue wants to officially get the Brian Daboll era off on the right foot, it needs to figure out how to keep Titans running back Derrick Henry from spoiling the party. Henry, who's coming back from a broken bone in his foot, suffered last year in Week 8, has helped Tennessee to a 22-3 record when he's rushed for 100 yards or more in a game. When healthy, Henry is good for nearly 5.0 yards per rushing attempt and 3.75 yards after contact, according to Pro Football Focus. So keeping this big bat from breaking free into the second level of the Giants defense and making sure that they get him wrapped up has to be a top priority if the New York Giants want to stop him. For more on your New York Giants and their Week 1 matchup against the Tennessee Titans, be sure to check out the Locked On Giants podcast every Monday through Friday, free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Who exactly are the Seattle Seahawks without Russell Wilson? That's what they're going to try and figure out in Week 1, and they will do it while Seattle plays against Wilson and his Denver Broncos. So how do you beat your former franchise QB to prove you are still relevant? We're going to find out by checking in with Locked On Seahawks.
When Russell Wilson makes his homecoming to Lumen Field on Monday Night Football, the Seahawks will be heavy underdogs hosting the Broncos, but there's still a path to a Week 1 victory. I'm host Corbin Smith for the Locked On Seahawks podcast, with all eyes on Wilson under center for the Broncos and Geno Smith replacing him under center for the Seahawks. The national narrative is that this game's going to be won going away by the explosive Broncos. For the Seahawks to have a chance to pull the home upset, the defense is going to have to step up to the plate and keep this a low-scoring affair. To make that happen, they're going to have to create a consistent pass rush and keep Russell Wilson in the pocket, preventing him from improvising and extending plays with his legs. They're also going to have to keep receivers in front of him and prevent those big plays downfield that Wilson was so known for during his 10 seasons with the Seahawks. If they can do those two things and keep this a close game, that'll allow Smith and the offense to orchestrate sustained drives and hopefully put together a number of field goal and touchdown drives to eke out a low-scoring win.
That's all for today on Locked On Game to Game NFL. Thank you for making Locked On your first listen every single weekday. Make sure you check out your team's Locked On podcast and subscribe to Locked On NFL on YouTube and wherever else you get your podcasts. I'm Kainani Stevens. This has been Locked On Game to Game.